The author L.P. Hartley wrote one of the most memorable opening lines in literature. He said, "The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there." Today's perspective is a look of what's become of Paris, from the view of it as a city famed for artists, authors and romantics, to the Paris of today, the capital as a livable space, and the extent to which parts have changed and become a museum of itself. My next guest is Cole Stangler, journalist and author of the book Paris is Not Dead, Surviving Gentrification in the City of Light. Cole, let's start at the outset of the book. You start in the northeast of Paris. Set the scene for us of the two cities you're telling us about.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I mean, the book is really trying to capture kind of two core themes. One is, as you're mentioning there in your introduction, we have this phenomenon of gentrification that's happening in Paris. So you have significant hikes in rent. You have displacement. Those are kind of the two big themes of gentrification. So from 2000 to 2020, housing prices tripled in Paris. You have 12,000 people leaving the city every year. So this important phenomenon of gentrification that's affecting much of the city, but at the same time, and that's what I'm trying to celebrate as well in the book. You do have these kind of bastions of resistance, for lack of a better word, to that trend, and that's much of the northeast of Paris. So we have this phenomenon of gentrification. People are being pushed out because the city is becoming increasingly unaffordable. But at the same time, there still very much is this other Paris that's still there, and that's again really the 18th, 19th, 20th, really the northeastern part of the city, and that's borne out by the statistics as well. But maybe just to give you a picture as well of this part of the city in the 18th. Where I used to live. This is a city where you have extremely dense, intricate street life. A lot is going on. I think that's something that's often underappreciated, is that just the sheer density of this kind of what's left of working class Paris. An immense array of different kinds of businesses, small businesses. In the Goutor in the 18th, which is historically African, was North African now more Sub-Saharan African neighborhood. You have all kinds of exotic fish that are being sold and are on display. Textile products. Really, this kind of dizzying kind of array of goods and services, and that's all packed into this very tight area of space. It's
interesting because you talk about the museum parts of Paris and how it almost become a Disneyfication of itself, or the Emily in Paris view, an Emilyfication of Paris. And the livable space. And I think just put that in context for us of what the tourists might see, the millions upon millions each year, and how, I think you said it very beautifully actually, you can step away from the cobblestones and see a very different Paris. It's suddenly very quiet. Yeah, so
the Paris that gets visited by a lot of tourists tends to be really the central part of the city and the left bank of the city. And and the fact is, it's not that people can't enjoy themselves on vacation and visiting different parts of the city, but these are not representative of either the city as a whole or much of the city as a whole, and certainly not France as a whole. You have a much higher share of white collar employees or retirees even that are living in these areas. You have a lot of vacant apartments as well. You have businesses that are quite expensive. Neighborhood like Le Marais, where we can see this process of gentrification. So this process of
which is really central where the town hall of Paris is.
Thank you. Yeah, right in the center of Paris. Yeah. Historically, Jewish immigrant neighborhood, then was known as a very LGBT friendly part of the city where you had lots of gay bars and clubs, and that has kind of gradually given way to essentially the same kinds of luxury stores and clothing shops. Really, not even necessarily luxury ones, but clothing stores that you can find in really any other major capital around the world. So you have this kind of homogenization too of the culture, and that's quite sad when you think about what the Marais used to be. It's now become, a place filled with Airbnbs and these businesses that are these international brands, very different from the Paris I was just describing in the 18th. Yeah.
You talk about the artistry, those that can hang out because they could afford to hang out, and you take us back to the 40s, and at a time, I think 1948, where average income, well, you're probably paying about 3%, you say, on rent, and tobacco was, 7 times the price of your average rent?
Yeah, that's the number that comes from the Minister of Reconstruction. So after World War II, so French people were spending 7 times more on tobacco than housing, which is kind of a mind-boggling figure. But think about what that means for the character of a city, to live in a city in which that's happening. And, that doesn't mean you want to romanticize necessarily the housing and living conditions, because landlords, because of rent controls, were not doing a lot of repairs. The conditions could be quite shoddy. People had shared bathrooms on the same floor in a lot of cases. So it's a very different city.
The kind that George Orwell would have been writing around.
Down and out in Paris and London. So that kind of city. So the conditions might not have been great, but at the same time, if your goal is basically to be in a place, to be part of a creative community, where you can focus on your craft and not have to worry about rent, those are quite ideal conditions, really. And what I try to do is, in the book, among other things, is to show the connections between these, the very inexpensive housing and this era of Paris as kind of this global mecca for the arts. In 1948, James Baldwin, the great American writer, comes to Paris. He has, $40 in his pocket, no book contracts, and he's able to find a place, right near Saint-Germain-des-Prés, in the heart of the really at that point, the kind of beating heart of the Western literary world. And he's able to kind of, he was obviously a great writer as well, but he was able to get into the community. We don't have that anymore. And that's kind of part of what the city has lost, and it's quite sad.
That's interesting. Wonder what his work would look like now. If he head in 2023 to Paris, he'd probably head off to the banlieues, to the suburbs outside with $40.
Almost certainly.
You're not going to get much. It's interesting because also your book is a kind of lament, it's kind of love story as well, and also a useful guide of where to search for, to see another side. There's a really interesting syndrome called Paris syndrome. It's a big thing in Japan, where people see so much literature, they think it's going to be like Emily in Paris or Amélie or Chocolat, and they're very disappointed when it's not. I think this book is almost an antidote to that.
Well, that's nice of you to say. I mean, I think the goal is to show this other Paris and to show it's the beauty of that's there as well. Again, it's not meant as just pure an exercise in nostalgia, because that can be kind of tempting to kind of go down that route, and maybe I indulge in that a little bit. But it's also a celebration of what's still around. So a place like Belleville. Very contemporary Paris and what's the richness that still is around. So, a place like Belleville as well, where you have this mixing of cultures, mixing of people from, different origins, different backgrounds, thanks to, one other really important piece is thanks to social housing. And that's really kind of where we can begin to think about the solutions is, you look at basically social housing, which is a policy of the state providing market or below market rents to people, to those in need. And social housing is why we still have these affordable parts of the city, and it's really part of the conversation for how to keep Paris affordable and to move forward.
Cole, great to talk to you. Cole Stangler, and his book, Paris is Not Dead, Surviving Gentrification in the City of Light, is out.